Good morning. Okay. So this is the part 4 in a 5-part series on Proverbs. And if you recall the first sermon in the series, Paul said that Proverbs is real wisdom for living life in this world. Remember, the Bible is more than just basic instructions before leaving earth. Right? It's not just a textbook that you can study to pass the entrance exam into heaven. The Bible offers practical wisdom for living life well here and now. Remember, wisdom is the art of skillful living. And today is about skillfully living with and in a world full of anger. In this day and age, in this fallen world, there may be no more useful skill than handling anger wisely, both others' anger towards us and our anger towards others. Because you will be angry. It's barely 10 o'clock, and there's a good chance that many of you have already been angry. If I'm being completely honest, I'm angry right now. Anger is such a common part of our lives that I bet we barely notice it half the time unless it boils over and affects others. Robert D. Jones, professor of counseling at Southern Seminary, wrote in his book, Uprooting Anger, "Anger is a universal problem, present in every culture, experienced in every generation. No one is isolated from its presence or immune from its poison. It permeates each person and spoils our most intimate relationships. Anger is a given part of our fallen human fabric." Anger goes so far back into our fallen humanity that it is the first emotion specifically named in the Bible after humanity was cast out of the garden. Genesis 4, 5, and 7 says that when Cain's offerings to God were disregarded, Cain was very angry, and his face fell. The Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry, and why has your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at your door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it." Proverbs teaches us that we can do well and rule over our anger. You'll see that when we learn to rule over our anger, we will better fend off the sin that's crouching at the door. Because anger is so ubiquitous, it's no surprise that there are several proverbs addressing this issue. All right, so here's a few of them. "Whoever is slow to anger has great understanding, but he who has a hasty temper exalts folly. A soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. A hot-tempered man stirs up strife, but he who is slow to anger quiets contention. Whoever is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he who rules his temper better than he who takes a city. Good sense makes one slow to anger, and it is his glory to overlook an offense." See, it's pretty clear that the wise person is slow to anger. So, if you want to be wise, don't be angry. Simple enough, right? It's not. We're not computers. We can't input a code that says, if angry, then don't. The wise person experiences anger just as much as the foolish person. And I'd even go so far as to say that the wise person experiences more anger because they perceive all of the foolishness around them. But Proverbs makes it clear that although the wise person experiences anger, they manage to skillfully control it. And this begins with the beginning of everything. Go back to the beginning. Proverbs 1:7 says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge," or wisdom. Conversely, and then correspondingly, Proverbs 25:29 says, "The fear of man lays a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is safe." You'll remember we've already talked about the difference between the fear of God and the fear of man, right? The positive and the negative fear. The fear of God is positive, right? It's joyful, it's wonderful, it's reverent. It's like being in the presence of someone you cherish. The fear of the Lord has no condemnation. But on the other hand, the fear of man, that negative fear, tends to focus on self-preservation, right? It's pain, it's punishment, it's consequences. It is the very fear of condemnation. And this is interesting because I think fear, especially the negative fear, is the root of most of our anger. Here's another proverb. It's not from the Bible, but you may be familiar with it. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering. And it's true. A hot-tempered or angry man stirs up strife or suffering. That's Proverbs 15:18. And as we just read, the fear of man lays a snare. Fear almost always precedes anger. And you know how I said anger is the second emotion specifically named in the Bible? Take a wild guess what the first one is. Genesis 3:10 says, "And Abraham said to God, I heard the sound of you coming in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, and I hid myself." See, that was negative fear of God, fear of consequences. And of course, sin preceded the fear, and it's been a cycle of sin, fear, anger ever since. All have sinned and fall short. Even those who refuse to acknowledge sin recognize that they are inadequate. I mean, if a person doesn't acknowledge sin because they don't fear God, then that person is by definition a fool, because the fool says in his heart there is no God, right? And as the Proverbs makes clear, the fool is quick to anger. And that kind of anger is rooted in insecurity, because Proverbs 3:26 says, "The Lord will be your confidence." But those of us who do fear God and do submit to him still have these pangs of inadequacy, disorder, and fear. Right? I'm afraid I won't be able to pay the bills. I'm afraid my kids won't live up to their full potential. Or worse, maybe this is their full potential. I'm afraid the political party I don't like is going to run the country into the ground. I'm afraid I'm just mediocre. I'm afraid everyone's going to leave. Whatever it is for you, there is generally a fear that underlies the anger that you feel. And whether it's internal and you work yourself up into an anger, or it's external and someone says or does something that reminds you of your fear, inadequacy, or nakedness. Regardless of the cause, you've got to remember that the anger is yours. It's not the fault of anybody else. You have to own it. And while that's kind of a bummer, because we tend to like to blame other people, especially when we're angry, it's a good thing, because it means you have control over it. And when you control your anger, it can actually make the fear and anxiety subside as well. Proverbs 16:32 says, "Whoever is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he who rules his spirit than he who takes a city." When you feel mighty, then you're less scared. When you're less scared, you're less angry. When you're less angry, you're more likely to reorient your negative fear into the positive fear of the Lord. And when you fear the Lord, when you're in awe of him and you trust him, you will be secure. Do not be afraid of the sudden terror or the ruin of the wicked when it comes. For the Lord will be your confidence and will keep your foot from being caught. By him you will walk on your way securely, and your foot will not stumble. If you lie down, you will not be afraid. When you lie down, your sleep will be sweet. And by the way, when you're well rested, you're less likely to be angry as well. In the fear of the Lord, one has strong confidence, and his children will have a refuge. The name of the Lord is a strong tower. The righteous man runs into it and is safe. So, while you own your anger and are able to subdue it, there are, of course, factors outside of your control that may provoke your anger, right? You can't do anything about other people's actions, but you can skillfully, with wisdom, mitigate the anger. Proverbs offers wisdom for that as well, right? A soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. A hot-tempered man stirs up strife, but he who is slow to anger quiets contention. Good sense makes one slow to anger, and it is his glory to overlook an offense. Now, this last one is particularly helpful. It doesn't mean just take the offenses. It doesn't mean you're supposed to be people's punching bag, right? It's not a misunderstanding of Matthew 5:39. It means just don't let the little things get to you. When you have wisdom, when you have control over your temper, when you are better than the mighty and have the security of God, the little things just don't matter. When you have that vertical, proper fear of God, you might just see people as people. You might have a little more empathy. You might remember that everyone has inadequacies and fears, and that those usually develop into annoying, if not outright angry, behavior. One of the very first sermons I preached here at Trinity, I referenced David Foster Wallace's Kenyon College commencement speech, "This is Water," right? And I'll mention it again because I think about it on an almost daily basis. In it, he offers a helpful worldly perspective on this kind of a thing. He said, "Angry thinking tends to be so easy and automatic that it doesn't have to be a choice. It is my natural default setting. It is the automatic way that I experience the boring, frustrating, crowded parts of adult life when I'm operating on the automatic, unconscious belief that I am the center of the world and that my immediate needs and feelings are what should determine the world's priorities." The thing is that, of course, there are totally different ways to think about these kinds of situations. In this traffic, all these vehicles stopped and idling in my way. It's not impossible that some of these people in SUVs have been in horrible auto accidents in the past and now find driving so terrifying that their therapist has all but ordered them to get huge, heavy SUVs so that they can feel safe enough to drive. Or the Hummer that just cut me off is maybe being driven by a father whose little child is hurt or sick in the seat next to him, and he's trying to get this kid to the hospital, and he's in a bigger, more legitimate hurry than I am. It's actually I who am in his way. Or I can choose to force myself to consider the likelihood that everyone else in the supermarket's checkout line is just as bored and frustrated as I am, and that some of these people probably have harder, more tedious, and painful lives than I do. It's hard, and it takes effort and will, but if you are like me, some days you won't be able to do it, or you flat out just won't want to. But most days, if you're aware enough to give yourself a choice, you can choose to look differently. But if you really learn how to pay attention, then you will know there are other options. It will actually be within your power to experience a crowded, hot, slow, consumer hell type situation as not only meaningful, but sacred. On fire with the same force that made the stars. Love, fellowship, the mystical oneness of all things deep down. And that's a secular perspective. Proverbs puts it much more simply and with a lot fewer words. Love covers all offenses. When you see the world with wisdom, when you see the world with love and the good fear of God, you begin to see the things that used to annoy you as the broken things they really are. Instead of your anger being motivated by bad fear or insecurity, your anger is motivated by grief. And that's okay. It's okay to be angry. Anger can be what motivates us to take action, to get things done, to fight for good. So, there's generally, I think, two major contributors to anger, right? Fear is one, grief is the other. And C.S. Lewis said in A Grief Observed, "I sat with my anger long enough until she told me her real name was grief." Anger in and of itself is not a sin. You probably already know that, but it's worth saying. Anger motivated by grief, curtailed by wisdom, and hemmed in with love is what people refer to, I think, as righteous anger. That's the kind of anger Jesus felt. If you remember John Demming's sermon a couple of weeks ago, he gave the illustration of pruning a plant rather than chopping it down. Do you remember? He said both are cutting actions, but one has life in mind while the other does not. In the same way, our anger can either be destructive or constructive. I'll give an example so we can see the juxtaposition between anger driven by fear and anger driven or motivated by grief. Mark 3 says, "Again, Jesus entered the synagogue, and a man was there with a withered hand. And the Pharisees watched Jesus to see whether he would heal him on the Sabbath, so that they might accuse him. And he said to the man with the withered hand, 'Come here.' And he said to them, 'Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm, to save a life or to kill?' But they were silent. And he looked around at them with anger, grieved at their hardness of heart, and said to the man, 'Stretch out your hand.' He stretched it out, and it was healed. The Pharisees went out and immediately held counsel with the Herodians against him, how to destroy him." Do you see? Jesus was angry because he was grieved by the hardness of the Pharisees' hearts. God wanted their obedience, to love their neighbor. But their fear of man, right, fear of how they would be perceived or how their power might be compromised, created anger. John 12:43 says, "For they loved the glory that comes from man more than the glory that comes from God." And in their anger, motivated by fear, they immediately sought to destroy. So when you're angry, and you will be angry, consider Jesus. He is true wisdom. He is wisdom incarnate. Proverbs 9:10 says, "The knowledge of the Holy One is insight." There are two things the Bible promises God will give us if we ask him, and they're both wisdom. James 1:5 says, "If anyone lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given to him." Proverbs 2, 20, 23, and 32 says, "Wisdom cries aloud in the street. If you turn at my reproof, if you repent, behold, I will pour out my spirit to you and make my words known to you. Whoever listens to me will dwell secure and will be at ease, without dread or disaster. Does that sound familiar? And I feel like I say this in every sermon, but I'll say it again. Joel 2:32. Whoever calls upon the name of the Lord, whoever calls upon wisdom personified, whoever calls upon Jesus will be saved. The only way to be wise, the only way to manage anger or life in general skillfully is to have wisdom. So call upon him. The only way to be wise in a situation in which you are angry or know how to handle it is to call upon Jesus. The knowledge of the Holy One is insight. Do any of you remember that trend in the 90s? WWJD, right? What would Jesus do? It's a good question to ask yourself in angry situations. And if you have the spirit of wisdom indwelling you, he will make his words known to you. And sometimes the answer to the question, what would Jesus do, is be angry. Because when Jesus saw the brokenness of sin in the world, he was grieved and he was angry. When you hear that over 1 billion babies will be clinically aborted this year, grieve and be angry. Consider helping the pregnancy center. When you hear that nearly 50,000 people will die by suicide in America this year alone, and the likelihood of that cause of death happening to a person who was encouraged or enabled to have a gender reassignment surgery increases 1,900%, grieve and be angry. When you learn that there are 50 million people living in modern-day slavery that we know about, and that the majority of those are children, grieve and be angry. And when you look around your own neighborhood and you see people who are slaves to drugs and alcohol and the system in general, grieve and be angry. When you see the brokenness of this world and all the lost sheep without a shepherd, grieve and be angry. And then pray earnestly to the Lord of the harvest. Be grieved, be angry, and do not sin. Because sin is crouching at the door. That's the fine line we as Christians have to walk between skillful living and sinful killing. Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger and give no opportunity to the devil. Remember, in the first biblical reference to anger, sin was already crouching at the door. And today, the waters of anger start bubbling up, and the devil is quick to take advantage. When we let our anger build, when we don't let it go, like when we don't overlook the offenses or let grief give way to disordered fear, it eventually has to escape. And when it does, it leaves a gaping hole in our spirit. In the time it takes to repair that hole, the devil has plenty of time to get a foothold. Proverbs 29:11 says, "A fool gives full vent to his spirit, but a wise man quietly holds it back." That's the English Standard Version. The Christian Standard Version says, "A fool gives full vent to his anger, but a wise person holds it in check." The New English Translation, my nerd Bible, for those of you who know it, says, "A fool lets fly with all of his temper, but a wise person keeps it back." And I point this out because it's worth considering. You'll notice the last word in the first clause is different in each of these verses. Right? Spirit, anger, temper. And it comes from the Hebrew word ruach, which means breath, wind, or spirit. But it can also figuratively mean life, anger, unsubstantiality, or like a strong huff of air. My nerd Bible explains the word. It says, the word has been commonly interpreted to mean his anger or his rage, but it probably means more than that. A fool gives full expression to his soul, whether it is in anger or bitterness or frustration or any other emotions. He has no self-control. See, the fool lays his soul bare when he's angry. Like Adam in the garden, he's naked and vulnerable. A fool gives full vent to his spirit, but a wise man quietly holds it back. And what else is a vent but an opening to let pressure out or to let outside elements in? And I don't know about you, but when I let fly my temper, the devil is very quick to point out all the other holes in my life. Like Adam in the garden, I feel fear and want to hide from God. I call into question the legitimacy of all this, my testimony, right? My evangelism. And I feel completely unworthy to call God my fortress. I'm sardonically reminded of James 3:10. Right? From the same mouth comes blessings and cursings. These things ought not to be so. And so I start to hold back the blessing. And I feel like Augur, the writer of Proverbs 30, said, I am weary, O God. I am weary and worn out. Surely I am too stupid to be a man. I have not the understanding of a man. I have not learned wisdom, nor have I knowledge of a holy one. Who has ascended into heaven and come down? Who has gathered the wind in his fists? Who has wrapped up the waters in a garment? Who has established all the ends of the earth? What is his name? And what is his son's name? Surely you know. But then he reminds me, I know the name. I'm no longer naked like Adam, but I'm clothed in his son's righteousness. Right? It's Jesus. And in his name, I have a secure fortress. Wisdom himself calls me in off the streets. Allow me to paraphrase Proverbs 4:6. Wisdom will keep you, and he will guard you. And I say all this because you will be angry. I will be angry. And it'll feel like you've forsaken wisdom, or that wisdom has forsaken you. But it need not lead to more sin. It need not lead to despair. But it probably will. And when it does, remember the name. Remember from whom your security comes. And in the meantime, remember Proverbs 4:23. Keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flow springs of life. Love covers all offenses. Christ's love covers even yours, even mine. He covered them once and for all and forever when he died on the cross and rose from the dead to live as your Lord and lead you in wisdom. Bestow the same love that you've been given to those who offend you. Be slow to anger. And in that way, you will turn away wrath, both the external and the internal. Good sense wisdom. Jesus makes one slow to anger, and it is his glory to overlook an offense.